Welcome to the Westminster tradition, where we unpack lessons for the public service. I'm Alison Lloyd-Wright, Managing Director of the Good Trouble Group and a recovering public servant. And joining me today are my fellow recovering public servants, Caroline Crozer-Barlow.
Hello, Alison.
And Danielle Elston, Managing Director of Good Government Advisory.
Hello, Alison.
Well, it's budget season, and times are tough. Across Australian jurisdictions and indeed the Westminster world, budgets are landing in a much chillier fiscal environment than many public servants have been used to. We're seeing governments talk about responsible budgets, restrained spending, elevated debt, cost of living pressures, and the need to review whether existing programs are still priorities. At the Commonwealth level, the government framed its own budget as one of the most responsible in decades, with a very large savings package and real restraint on spending growth. In Victoria, the Treasurer has described a low-spend budget. In Tassie, ratings agencies are openly sceptical about whether the savings task can be delivered, and in WA, even with a much stronger budget position, government is pursuing targeted savings. So today we're not really talking about whether governments want a more efficient public service in the abstract. We're talking about the more immediate public service problem. Budgets are dropping, the envelopes are tighter, you might have savings to deliver, and yet a public service still has to be delivered. Danielle, because you have an unusual interest in these things, we're going to start with you.
Yeah, I don't know how I've always ended up in an unusual. I think it's because when I came back into the public service, I came back when within like 5 minutes we had some really, really very huge lead to savings budgets. And so one of my first leaps into public sector leadership was that process of, okay, that's a lot less money than what used to be. How am I going to design what it is I have to deliver around that? And I think the narrowing of it matters because bless treasurers, and they can say it's about efficiency and productivity till the cows come home. And I am a personal aficionado and lover of both efficiency and productivity. Actually, the envelope needs to be tighter, right? Like there's this broader macroeconomic conditions that is kind of requiring of them. And all of those kind of funding envelopes, and this happens every year, and so when they are smaller, there's this sense of like, what will I do? And it's like, well, every year you get a budget. It's just that the task of what you do with it now is a little bit trickier. And
especially for jurisdictions or people who've been used to year-on-year growth.
Yeah. And I think this is the thing. We have had a pretty multi-speed state government economy in Australia for the last probably 10 or 15 years. There have been jurisdictions with different approaches to spending, who have had different revenue bases, different kind of whether they were doing savings or trying to constrain the public service, different wage agreements, all sorts of things. And so we've had really lumpy practice because of different authorising environments around the country. And what I think has shifted in the last 12 months is much more uniformity across jurisdictions around tighter fiscal environment, really crunching down on making do with what you've got as often as you can, as much as you can. And particularly, I think, and then even where there is any room to move in those budgets, it's like a view around it being for direct cost of living kind of, it's not for the built-out programs, it's not services. Yeah. And so what I think that means is that for the jurisdictions in particular that had probably not basically better times of it for a lot of the last 10 or 15 years, that's that time where new priorities came with buckets of new money and an implementation team and a evaluation program,
a marketing budget and
all that crap, right?
Oh my God.
And so I think what's really interesting about that is that if that goes on for a long time, you kind of lose the muscle of doing things really tightly, but also that it can sometimes be basically good, fun and innovative, and that some of the best things I've seen happen have not happened from getting a budget bid up that covered everything down to, the carpet cleaning and every last contingency was accounted for. Some of the best things was working inside the original envelope. And so I just wanted to, there's lots of you out there right now doing this stuff going, oh my God, now what? I've got this envelope. It's not as big as it was, or it's the same size, but what am I being asked to do with it is bigger than before. And I thought we'd just have a bit of a yarn about some of the things you can do and how you lead in those.
And of course, that is, as we have discussed, the whole theme of the book I'm reading at the moment is that actually constraints make people more creative, more innovative, and you get more interesting outcomes in constrained circumstances, which we can go to a bit later on. I think one of the things I want to say here, though, is the advice which I find myself giving to public servants a lot, which is, no one elected you, I'm so sorry. Which is to say, like, the choice about how much money is spent on what things is a choice for our elected representatives. And unless and until you would like to run for Parliament, it's not a matter for you. Your job is to deliver against what you're given. Suck it up. Yeah.
Also, though, I would just I completely agree with you. And I'd just add, though, that we have had some really long-term governments of the same colour, right? Not at the Commonwealth level, but in some states who've had long governments. And I think it can be really shocking to people if you've worked in a policy area where the direction has not shifted or moved or changed, or its level of priority has not moved, and you've been doing it for, say, 10, 12, 15 years, some people have developed a really personal attachment to that. And then either for fiscal reasons or a change of government reasons, it's like you're either not the priority or we're going to deregulate it, make it smaller, make it bigger, whatever it is. There is a really big job for leaders in that, Alison, in saying, whilst you may have felt like it was yours, because we had a very steady, long government, it was always the elected officials' view that was our third priority, and now our elected officials have a different
The elected officials' view about how they spend taxpayers' money. It's not your money either.
And so there has never been a better time to be going back to basics with teams, I think, when we start seeing kind of News Limited headlines and there can be that kind of, there's a lot of blah, blah about how these things are kind of repeated, is to be reminding teams about which bit in the system is our job, which bit is someone else's job. But I do think before we kind of get there, there is real pain in.
I was about to say, I'm being a bit flip, but it hurts. It sucks to have to try and find a 10% saving and still deliver what you have been delivering.
Yeah.
And in particular, I think because one of the kind of confusions in a lot of public debate is a confusion that money is a solution and therefore that taking away money is definitely a problem. Like there's kind of these things are broken already because we under-resource them. And it's like, no, these things are broken and they are operating within an existing bucket of money. There are probably things we could do that might make them less broken or might not. But the money is a part of, but not everything. But we essentialize everything about money, and it really does hit people's sense of value. And I think
it feels like no one respects what we do. They don't understand or appreciate or value it.
Yeah.
If they did, they wouldn't ask me to make this saving.
Where it is different, and so I just want to cover this bit before we move back into the macro, is where we are talking. So there are still big chunks of public services that do have insecure employment, so contractors, temp, labour hire, people in short-term funding or attached to programs kind of thing. It is really difficult to exit good people and actually exit, God, that's so public servanting, to tell them they don't have a job anymore and they're not going to be paying, that they're going to have to struggle pay their rent and their mortgage.
Agreed.
And I do also reflect that in good times we don't seem as worried about securing our workforce, and then the logical way to reduce the size of your workforce is not permanent employees who get redundancy or redeployment. It's, this is a person on a 2-year contract and it ends in 2 months. So the sharpest, most industrially sound way will be to look at non-permanent forms of employment. So if we've kind of scooched along for a while using lots of that type of employment, that's when our own lack of kind of, sorting out our administrative arrangements is going to bite us on the on the bum. But I think it's not about saying stop being silly. It doesn't matter if workforces shrink and people leave and don't have a job, but it's particularly for leaders, it's acknowledging that pain without reflecting all that panic back down into the team, because it is never as many people as you think.
Yeah.
And these things take on the most incredible lives of their own from a rumour perspective, so far as what the actual impact is. And so, like, the doom spiral basically is a real thing at this point in the cycle.
I've seen so many leaders fall into this trap of kind of thinking, my team is having a tough time hearing that we are going to be we're going to be ending a program that we love delivering, or we're going to be moving to we're going to be part of a staffing freeze because we're getting a general efficiency dividend or whatever. And you see them do this thing where they're like, yeah, it's terrible. Treasury hates us. The centrals don't value our work. No one understands the value of what we do.
Even our own secretary or chief executive didn't fight hard enough.
And I think, Danielle, you would say, feel supportive for like 5 minutes, and then it is just poison. It is absolute poison. Like, it sits in the culture for so much longer than people think that it does. And like, here's a really good example. I worked with a team once who had been in a central, and they were like super high flying and everyone loved them. And then their budget got cut and they got pushed out to a line agency, and they felt very, very sad about that, right? And there was a lot of kind of misery, and we never get the blah, and we've had to blah, 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 blah. And then they started to get like lots more attention and lots more resourcing. And I remember telling a member of that team, I'm like, oh, look, government's committed to X and Y. And that person burst into tears and was like, but they don't really understand how important this work is. And it's like they had got themselves in such a victim hole that by the time they were like even back on the up, they just couldn't even see their way out. Like, they just were so victimized by the system, as opposed to just, it's okay that government had different priorities for a while.
Yep. Back to the old Alisons who no one elected you. I think it's really important that you, like, that leaders, and that goes to managers, says this is real. Like, you don't want to gaslight people.
Yeah.
It has consequences. I know this much about them. I don't know this bit, but I'll tell you as soon as I do. But this is a budget constraint, not a moral judgment. It's not even it's not even a personal performance review. Our job has to be to work out what changes. And I think, like, acknowledging pain and co-authoring panic, there's sometimes a bit of a slim line, and like, that's one of the big jobs.
And I think one of the things around moral judgment is just that sometimes I really believe that moral injury is real. I believe that staff who are consistently forced to do things that go against their values, that they see are damaging people, that they consistently see people they can't help, that is a moral injury in your staff.
Agree.
I think it is not a moral injury, or I think you are leaning into it if a government says, actually, we don't give this to people anymore. Actually, that's something we don't do anymore, like that. But we have a kind of, like, sometimes I feel like we have this zero-sum thing where it's like you have something, you're entitled to something, everyone gets something, or like and people find it really uncomfortable to say, actually, these aren't things that we all get. Yeah. And that is not a moral injury. That's a judgment about whether or not you agree with that prioritisation. But it's not a moral injury to just say we're not doing that anymore. That's just like, you don't agree.
Yeah. Although we so rarely, like, the saying you're not going to do it anymore is not like we do a lot more of absorbing it, reducing training budgets, like doing all this other stuff around it. And some of the mechanisms are such blunt force, kind of silly options that have perverse outcomes as far as I'm concerned.
Which is to say, I think it's always what is the role of a leader? The role of a leader is to, go in pursuit of that North Star or that outcome with the resources that are available to them, and, advocate for more where they can. But your job doesn't change just because the resources available to you moved in a different direction than you were expecting. And it's still very much your role and your duty not to just cry and complain about it. Because also I'm of the view that as a leader, you don't get the liberty of your feelings in front of your staff.
That's such good advice. That is such good advice.
Yes.
Yeah, go and
like you can have them
about it.
That's what your partner or your friends. Or
that's what your partner or your friends are for, or a therapist, or heck,
authentic
even the
leadership.
EAP.
Authentic leadership does not mean having a massive whinge and a cry back into your teams.
Absolutely, because then that's exactly right. And I think that becomes so damaging and corrosive. It undermines people's comfort in your carriage of them. I recall once, this is unrelated to budget, but I had to do something, and I thought in the interests of authenticity and vulnerability, I would say that I was nervous about, I was giving like a webinar to lots of people, and I said, and so I told my staff I was nervous about doing it. The wobble went all the way down. Like, then it wasn't just me that was wobbly. And I really regret doing that because I'm not saying be inauthentic. You should still describe a bit like in the earlier conversation we were having, the conflicts that you're going to have to manage now and the tensions that need to be worked through. And you can talk about being upset about it, but you shouldn't be having a tantrum in front of people in the interest of authenticity or vulnerability.
No, because the flip of that is usually teams will pick up what you put down. So if they will pick up on whatever it is that you put down on the table, and if you put down I think it's going to be tough, but I think I'll help us figure it out, or if you depends on what you put down is what they will pick up. But can I just take you to some of the more specifics, just because I love it how everyone thinks they're special, basically. And at the end of the day, there's 10 things. There's only there's not that many ways that we go about this. So, the Australian government at the moment is very heavy on reducing external labour and non-wage costs, along with strategic commissioning and bringing core work back in-house. So, they have a question of can they actually do internally what they were buying externally. WA has a surplus and low debt and all the GST, but is still pursuing targeted savings through workforce management and the ever so regular advertising and travel and consultant reductions. That's a list I reckon I've seen 100 times in the last 25 years.
How are there still savings to be made in there?
Because
are they also going on a Quango hunt? I love those too.
Oh, they're my favourite. We're going on a Quango hunt. What a beautiful day.
But these are my next things. Do you know why we can still cut those things? Because we only ever did it temporarily. And so when everyone panics, it's yes, we're going to have to live without these 3 things for the next 4 years, but they always come back.
They always come back.
Victoria is going after the old share services and ICT centralisation as one of its kind of methodologies.
Sorry, I shouldn't
are doing position reductions through attrition and voluntary redundancies. And here in South Australia, we've got and I'm not sure if I've seen this in South Australia, this particular one in South Australia before, the 1 in 2 out, 1 in 1 out, 1 in 2 out vacancy control. So basically, if you're going to advertise
hiring freeze,
non-front loads,
it's a half hiring freeze.
But it's like a half hiring freeze
for everyone who's not a frontline service deliverer.
No, but it's only a 0.5. It's a 0.5 hiring freeze. It's quite different.
So the thing about this stuff is there's not that many ways with which we do some of these things. I am personally a fan of a government that says, here is the size of your envelope, and I will not tell you as a secretary whether you're going to get rid of it via PD restructuring, because sometimes you want to restructure. There are times when people are actually, these savings are excellent and it gives me an environment to do what I need to do. So I'm not a huge fan of very hard and fast. You must lose 22.7 FTE in the first year and 31 in the third. I think it's a bit, to be honest, I think it's a little bit debasing of our heads of finance and secretaries. And I think just being told that is your hard budget, meet it using all the mechanisms, and all the mechanisms are there, right? Cut your advertising, cut your this. Like we all know, like you know what they are.
I mean, sometimes politically the savings target is a people target, like a bloated public service where you want to trim by 2,000 FTE. Sorry, Caroline, over to you.
Well, no, I just think like it's funny because a lot of people called me about the South Australian budget savings target because they're all like, this is really inefficient and like, why would you do it this way? And I'm like, oh, buddy, because people don't deliver their bloody savings, right? Like I just think there's a fundamental thing where I'm terribly sorry if your agency or your division is very good at delivering their savings, but there's a reason why they do this get more specific stuff. It's because consistently savings are not delivered. And so they have to put some meat around it, like politically, as Alison says, like in the sense of like bloated public service, but also concretely, because then they can point to them when they don't meet them and say, hang on a second, if you had saved every second vacancy, you would have delivered your savings. And so anyway, I just, it's like,
my problem with hiring freezes is that they're not
wildly inefficient. Yeah.
And they're not capability based, and
of course
it never improves productivity. And I like to use these moments where government says there's less money, please do better. I like to use those to go, maybe we don't need this function and don't need that is everyone getting every last drop of what they can get out of their teams, or do we have some performance problems? And so it takes away a lot of your capacity to do what really does need to be done at a minimum every 10 years in everywhere, which is a really hard and like a good look around. And so that's why I don't like it. But also, like, just I'm curious, frontline services being protected. I can't find a single one in my little bit of loose research for this episode. I was like, has anyone anywhere said
I'm targeting.
They are cutting teachers,
nurses and firefighters? Away you go.
No, interestingly, I don't think that is a thing people ever say.
And so, like, seriously, that's my question. Like, is this sustainable to always make it out to be shiny bum office workers? Like, for every so-and-so firefighters, you do actually need someone who pays them, and you do need, like, someone who procures the truck that they ride in. Appliance, I learnt when I did some emergency services work. Not
appliance,
a truck, appliance.
No, it's not a truck.
Looks like a truck to me.
Well, that's why you don't do the firefighting, Danielle.
But
that and the movie.
Seriously, like, this is my question back to both of you. Protecting the front line means that you are ever going after a tighter and tighter core. What do you think? Good idea? Bad idea?
I mean, you need the people that support the frontline workers, and it is. I understand the political impetus behind why we do it, but I find it frustrating, and in a perfect world where savings are routinely delivered when they're given, I would much prefer a generalised, here's the envelope you need to work in. Yep. Let's work out what we could do differently.
I mean, I think what you discover in practice, and it's like that seesaw of centralisation and decentralisation, is when you protect the front line suddenly gets a lot of HR officers, right? Because people are like, I need someone to fill out my forms, or I need, so I think it's part of a more general swing. I don't look for rationality in systems in particular. Like, I kind of think like as in, I just think like they're the savings. We try different tactics at different times. They work sometimes, they don't work other times. Like I kind of, I try not to invest too much emotional energy in it. I think
not just in systems. I think we will be happier, more peaceful individuals if we just stop trying to look for rationality in a whole lot of things.
Exactly right. Like, because there is a rationality, right? They need to deliver savings. This is a way of delivering savings. They change the way they do it at different times because sometimes it doesn't work and sometimes it does work. Like, it's a kind of, you can see the purpose of the system is what it does. Like, it is delivering broadly an attenuation of cost in the public sector in a way that I think it wouldn't if you didn't have these blunt measure things. Sometimes it does something terrible. Like, I think robo-debt is a really good example of where like an FTE freeze, a service level cap, led to a workforce that was uniquely unsuited and longevity related to notice that something terrible was there are real consequences for those things, but I don't and so that's like the role of leaders, right? Is to be like, we need to keep our eye out for all of these unintended consequences. But if it wasn't this, it'd be something else. Says the person who's out of government at the moment and thus not feeling the awfulness of it. And actually, maybe I just wanted to when we were talking about the culture stuff before, maybe this, Danielle, is going to transition us to where you want to go next anyway. I was busily looking up in my my phone. Brene Brown and Adam Grant did an episode the other day around exploring the paradoxes of things, and one of the ones they noticed was something called the Stockdale paradox, which is the paradox of who survived the North Korean or maybe it was North Vietnamese prisoner of war camps, and the people who didn't survive were the optimists, right? And you're like, oh, that's a paradox. Why would the optimists not survive? And they come up with this kind of description that you need to both hold faith that we will be overcome in the end and be very realistic in acknowledging the brutal reality of where we are now. That is the role of a leader in a savings environment. You need to both hold faith that you will continue to deliver and that there will be public value out of the work that you do, that you will find a way through, and you need to say it sucks. But it's like the balance of those two is really important. And I think when we were talking about like what you have to do, you can't just do one, you have to do both.
Which is why I was going to use Shackleton as my similar
exactly.
but reliable example for the same. How do you keep men stuck on an ice floe for literally 2 years?
2 years!
Like, open to the idea that they're going to survive and not turning on each other and eventually getting rescued. There's a lot of good examples of managing that tension in the book Endurance, if anyone's interested. Where were we going?
Sorry.
So the job is service design, not the mechanisms then, isn't it really, Danielle? Program design, service design. How does my bit of the world do what it does with less? It
should be. And that should be exciting to particularly leaders. Like, I'm always surprised to meet people who don't have a bit of a thing where they're like, that they don't want to get rid of, like that they think has no value. I'm always like, really? I've always had a bit where I'm like, we could totally get rid of that. Even if there was no authorizing to do it and you were never able to do it, it's like, I personally think this has little public value. So you really have to get back to that core part. And I just like, it is really tight thinking. So like, what are we legally required to do? What has government explicitly committed to? You got to protect safety and legality, but what you do get to a lot of that is useful, but actually discretionary, or that's legacy, and everyone loves it, but it has no love in the authorizing environment or the community or the customer or whatever else. Everything we do is not essential. This is like when you pull out your business continuity plan, right? Like, and there should be a little bit of a hint there that we could probably live without you for a little while. And I don't mean that. This is the trade-offs we have to make, and understanding what is essential versus lovely is the job in these in the times that we find ourselves in, these seasons as a season of life. And then you've got to make the trade-off. So like maybe, again, back to I think one of our previous hypotheticals, maybe we now have a 15-day turnaround time and we tell everyone that's how long it takes. You better get your applications in earlier. Maybe we stop doing bespoke things for low-risk matters. We change our compliance approach. Maybe that monthly report that no one ever read anyway becomes quarterly. Maybe, proactive engagement programs. Maybe, we'll answer the phone if you call us, but that's all we've got at the moment. And so there's lots of things that leaders working with managers need to scope up and look at really unemotionally, really kind of not about what you like doing, because I like half the time I've had to keep the stuff where I'm like, legally required and boring and not the pretty stuff, but also what this place has to do. This is the core part, right? Like this is actually what we have to do. So that's I think the service design piece, and I think also that gives teams more confidence that you're not hickledy-pickledy, like just not feeling
cutting off your nose in spite of your face, or
like we're not having, I'm not fixing the lift, we're going with 2 lifts, not 3 lifts, and like all of this kind of random performative low spend,
lifts with mirrors though. Caroline.
Well, I was thinking, so Danielle, I just wanted to make explicit, I think, what you're saying, which is, the connection of what you were saying to our earlier conversation about the stupidity of, hiring freezes or, only 2 out, 1 in or whatever the thing is. I think there's something about for leaders, it is worth checking. You probably have more authorization than you think you do to come up with a proactive solution to your savings. And so the leaders who really get pinged by this are the ones who just kind of hope they don't have to deliver any savings because no one leaves, right? That's their strategy. Whereas I think if you kind of think through your business and you're able to offer, your group director and say, look, I'm going to actually be able to give you, 4 FTE. Can I then be exempted from the thing? Those are conversations that are actually worth having. I think sometimes people kind of think the rule is very ruly, but actually you're going to be able to navigate around it because you're delivering the outcome that's intended. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. We've talked a bit about leaders. Not all of our listeners are leaders. What do more junior people do in this environment?
Sometimes I think this is very cyclical, and I don't know, I'm feeling really old this time round. And the reason I'm feeling old is I have that sense of most people, that the change isn't nearly as big as the brouhaha around it. And I think at a pure experience, so that's not level, Alison, I'm not saying, I'm not saying whether you are, I'm not talking about your level, I'm talking about more junior people who have done this a few times start to be less panicked. And if you are reasonably new to the public service, and we have lots of listeners who get sent on to the pod as a bit of a 101, and you poor souls for the cacophony of crazy that you then are subjected to. But I think for the more junior people, just do your very best not to take on the panic around you.
Yep. Yeah. Hard yes. You look for people who are adding value, who are creative and constructing and solutions oriented, and as a leader, you're looking for that in people to kind of give new opportunities to, because there are new opportunities in these contexts.
And also, if you're new, you might even have more ideas. You may even be the person who's like, because it's often the person who's just started who's like, why do we do all these forms? What's going on over here? It is a great opportunity to try new things. I do appreciate that it's hard, and I don't want to be seen as flip about it, but there is a lot of opportunity to do things differently when you have to do more or the same with less. And how you all work together and culture and being slightly upbeat about that will make a big difference as to kind of how it rolls.
So the start of the book I'm reading at the moment, which is about the importance of constraints, called Inside the Box by David Epstein, is about this company called Real Magic, who were essentially making the first iPhone kind of a thing, but well before the first iPhone. But they had so much interest in what they were doing that they had unlimited money. Mm-hmm. They had all these corporate partners. They had no constraints whatsoever. And they, as a result, made a total dud that I think sold 3,000 units in total. They were inventing technology to do the thing that they wanted it to do because no technology already existed. And I think the lesson there is there's a lot of things that, if you can look at, is there something that exists already that we could adapt or apply differently? Is there another way to do this? That actually the savings task can be a really interesting exercise in innovation, not just haircuts, not just
If I can do a shout out to one of my favourite savings stories. So I worked in education for a while, which is usually a bit buffered from savings because of the Gonski funding arrangements. So it's always, even in South Australia, a very poor government. It's always been reasonably well funded compared to other agencies since I was there. But some of our colleagues were like, really suffering from really big savings. And one of the things that we noticed is like we're doing stuff for kids' well-being. Well, actually, like there are agencies doing stuff like to promote attendance, for example, that are directly on point. And so that was an opportunity for us to actually work more closely with our counterparts. So we just kind of funded one of their programs, right? And it wasn't just giving them money. It was like it gave us control and design and interfaces and all the sorts of things. And I think like that's the kind of innovation that comes with constraint. Whereas if we both just kept running our separate, attendance programs, everyone's like, why? I just think there's something, there is a real opportunity in that space. So rich agencies, look after your little ones.
Not everything that we do needs to be, we do this a lot when we talk about strategic planning with government, like what things are we leading, but what are we convening? Where are we creating space for others? How are we enabling, facilitating? Not everything actually is necessarily best delivered by us. Danielle.
Love that.
Yeah. Can I just go back? I don't want to wrap up without something I wanted to mention, which was you need to understand your employment status and arrangements. And I don't mean that in a straight to the barricades way. I'm just I'm often shocked by the number of people who don't understand whether they're permanent or contract and the implications of that. As people start restructuring and there is kind of stuff around, when you said, Alison, what should junior staff do? Not panic, but also be very clear about their contract terms or their permanency or the fact that they're a substantive such and such but acting in a such and such. There is a lower level of understanding of those things than there ever has been, and that can be an unusual shock. Like it's a shock you shouldn't have to have when you find out that perhaps you are substantively a such and such for, and that's actually all the government's required to give you if it's a long time since you've been in that role or you've been in rolling contracts. So just I think be aware of those things so that you understand in some ways what risk, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, but at the same time, don't get too, I watched as a division I was in went through a savings task where I think it was TVSPs, 1 in 10 people were going to be TVSP'd out.
Mm-hmm.
And I wasn't the leader, I was in a junior role, but the guy who sat on the desk behind me ended up on mental health sick leave for about 6 months because he was so overcome by the uncertainty and the stress of what might happen to him. Partly that I think, again, falls back on leaders to manage that tension as you were talking about, Caroline. But also, be realistic, know what your risk is, know what your fallback plans are, but also know that it's 1 in 10 and that might be you, but it might not be you.
Yeah, I suppose what I'm saying is if you are in a contract that finishes in 6 months and you know that your division has savings to make, it's a good time to start looking for jobs that are being advertised at that level or possibly even a level below that are ongoing or a longer contract.
Yep.
And actually, look, my position is everyone should be really clear on their employment arrangements all the time, but particularly when there's lots of change going on, just so that you know what you can expect.
Any other final thoughts before we wrap it up?
No, my main thought is it's not always bad news, and that it can be really good news for being clear on priorities. And I hope to hear lots of stories of using this opportunity for innovation over the next year or two.
And budget constraint isn't persecution. It's elected leaders doing what they were elected to do with taxpayer money. So our podcast mug winner today is Hugh Driver for his insightful correspondence with us. Thank you, Hugh. And that's it from us. Till next time.
Just some appropriately bureaucratic disclaimers. While we've tried to be as thorough in our research as busy full-time jobs and lives allow, we definitely don't guarantee that we've got all the details right. Please feel free to email us corrections, episode suggestions or anything else at thewestminstertraditionpod@gmail.com. Thanks to Pampot Audio for our intro and outro music. Till next time.